Thank you. Before starting with my slides, there was a question an hour ago about WebGL in the browser. So I have a demo for you. It's a very famous website. Ellie Goulding is a singer, and she did something really cool to advertise a song. And just a few seconds. The mouse controls the display. Can accelerate, and it goes on and with changes in the colors and everything. And even on a tablet, it works absolutely fine. No heat on the laptop, no heat on the tablet. Everything is based in the browser. It's just incredible. Okay, enough. And let me wait for the colors because it's really cool. Okay, this kind of things were just impossible 5 years ago, and I guess this is the future of browsing, with inline animations that are really going to be very cool. Unfortunately, will kill Flash. It's funny. It makes always the same effect. So yes, Peter Paul said it. I'm co-chairing the CSS Working Group. The CSS Working Group is a group of roughly 90 people with 35 people active. They are all as crazy as Stab, and my task is to interrupt them and prevent them from sending new specs to the working group because we have only 24 hours a day. It is sometimes difficult. You see that we are not only standardizing documents, we sometimes cook during W3C sessions. We have aprons all the time. And the second photo was taken last week in Tokyo, and it's fixing table layout, thanks to Google. So media queries, what is it about? A few years ago, we had a buzzword called Web 2.0 that only journalists understood. They used it a lot, and now the buzzword is responsive design. The main component of responsive design is media queries. So, who in the room, please raise your hand if you don't know what are media queries. My goodness, okay, I'll go away. My talk is pretty useless then. But you probably don't know that media queries are based on two things. First part, the one you probably know, the CSS part. I have to remove this because I don't see you with the lights. And the second part, which is a JavaScript API. And that one is really little known. Let's move on. So the history of that document is quite long, unfortunately. It was submitted as a proposal to the CSS Working Group by Opera and Microsoft, roughly 12 years ago. So 10 years seems to be a constant in the CSS Working Group, unfortunately. We reached the first status of candidate recommendation, which means it's the call for implementation status in July 2002, so pretty fast. And then we slowed down because we needed a test suite. And to have a test suite, we need to have 2 interoperable implementations. And because of browser vendors' priorities, it took some time. So we reached proposed recommendation in April 2012, after the completion of the test suite, and all the implementations were interoperable. And it was released as a standard in June. Most modern browsers implement it on desktop and mobile. So I'm sorry to kill your first question. Yes, this is usable right now by everyone, almost everywhere. PPK, I'm sure PPK has a test somewhere that will demonstrate exactly the contrary, but don't trust them. If you don't use media queries, people will not rely on it. So just move on, let the old things die, let IE6 die, and use media queries. The original media stuff comes from HTML4 and CSS2. We decided to have media types in HTML and CSS to be able to select the rendering device. I want to write my styles for the screen, for a projector, for a handheld device, a speech browser, and things like that. So we had all these media types, the first one being a bit special. All means all the others. I highlighted in green the ones that are really used. Screen and print, obviously. Handheld, just a very little bit, and it's almost extinct. Projection should work. For instance, now I should be able to use a projection style sheet. Unfortunately, almost no browser implements it correctly. So I highlight it in light green, but you cannot rely on it. Speech, I think, is only implemented by one browser, TV Raman's browser. It's an extension to Emacs, and I think it's the only one. TTY and TV is not implemented at all. Braille and embossed, honestly, I have no idea, unfortunately. But it probably means it's not implemented. So HTML 4.1, the spec, was really meant to allow the extensibility of the media types from the very beginning. It was explicitly mentioned like that. Future versions of HTML may introduce new values and allow parameters to media types. So this is exactly what we did. Unfortunately, we introduced a provision in the spec saying that if you had something outside of the ASCII set plus dash plus numbers plus hyphen, we truncate the media type. So if you have screen, space, something, we only kept screen. That was a mechanism to allowing legacy browsers to still cope with extensions. And you'll see it's going to be really, really useful. So CSS 2.1, this is the kind of things you do all the time, and you all know about that. So you can use a media declaration in the style sheet itself with the nat media rule. You can use it in a link element with the media attribute and a style attribute. It's a style element too. These are the media queries. So I took the example of a screen, and I want my style sheets to apply to the document if the viewport has a maximum width of 500 pixels. And I mean, there's nothing super difficult. It's quite understandable. You just add a constraint to the media type, and you're done. We'll discuss the syntax of it now. So a media query is a condition. It means that it's a Boolean, it's false, or true. First thing is the print. So print is a media type. If you're printing, if your document goes onto a printer, it's true. So here we're on a projector. It is false. And the style rules inside your link element, style element, or @media @rule will not be triggered if the media type is not the right one. The second one, screen and, between parentheses, color and min width 100 pixels. Obviously, we're on a screen, it's in color, and it's wider than 100 pixels. So everything is true, and it's and, so everything is true. So such a style sheet would apply. Not screen. We'll discuss it a little bit later, but here we have screen and max width 500 pixels, and it is true. It is true because the width is above 500 pixels. In fact, I'm projecting in 1280, I think. So the condition is false, and I'm negating it with the not, and it becomes true. The fourth one is a group of media queries, actually. You have one media type projection, and the second one is handheld and maximum resolution. So this is true because I'm using a projector. And the second one, I don't really care. It could be true too, but I don't care. One is true. Cell phone, please. The fifth one. Yeah, fifth one. Orientation portrait. Here, I don't have a media type. I only have the condition. This is doable. This is explicitly in the syntax. You don't need to add a media type. It means all and orientation portrait. I'm not in portrait mode, so it is false. And the last one is a bit special. It's only screen and max width 500 pixels. So if you have a legacy browser, and that legacy browser reads only the bit screen and something, as I said, it will truncate after screen, so it will do something. If you want to make sure that the legacy browser does not apply that style sheet, you put only. Okay? It's kind of hacky, I know, but it's to make sure that only the modern browsers apply it and not the legacy ones. The power of CSS. We can use Calc inside media queries. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. You can compute a width based on pixels and EMs and stuff like that. I mean, all the things we have always wanted to do, computing precisely the size of the viewport. Okay, let's say I'm targeting a 650 pixels viewport, and I want to remove one EM, and the size of the font is blah, blah. We all do that all the time. Now with Calc, we can just target 615 pixels minus 2 EM. It's easy, and it's usable almost everywhere. And I think in fact, we resolved to allow Calc inside media queries recently. Was it in Tokyo? I think so. So not, as I said, when you have projection and orientation landscape, the two conditions are true. So the global thing is true. Not does not apply only to projection. Just imagine you have parentheses around the whole query. And since the whole thing is true, not of the thing is false, and it does not apply. So this is something you really have to keep in mind. We did not put parentheses for backwards compatibility reasons with the parsing. But if you read a condition, make sure to read not of the global thing, not of the projection only. So only, as I said, it's only here to hide style sheets from older user agents. I bet you are not going to use it a lot because IE 7, 8, and 9 are dying at fast pace, fortunately. They're not dead yet, unfortunately. But this is going to disappear in the long run. What if the media query is invalid? And you have a group of media queries with one query that is invalid in the group. For instance, print and vendor Epson. So that does not exist in the media query spec. If it was a selector and a group of selectors in a style rule, the whole thing would be dropped. This is not the case in media queries, and the CSS Working Group decided that on purpose. So we don't break all the style sheets and all the devices if you made a mistake, for instance, a typo or something. So this will be restricted to screen and projection. The last part of the group will be dropped because it is invalid. The vendor media feature is not recognized. So what kind of media features do you have? You have the obvious ones, width and height. The argument behind, after the colon, is a length. Which means you can use EMs, you can use pixels, centimeters, you can use a calc. The only thing you cannot use right now, we should be allowing it, and we don't for the moment, it's percentages. Because we have a problem with percentages if you use it in a media query and the width or the height of your document is also a percentage of the viewport. We have a circular dependency. And we don't know really how to break it yet. We have to work on that. So the width and the height is the width and the height of the viewport, or basically of your browser window. If it's an iframe, it's the width and the height of the iframe. Okay? Device width, device height, this is relative to the screen, to the physical thing. It's entirely different. That way you can target a given device or a given type of screen, a small one, medium size, large displays like your laptop or desktop. You can do whatever you want. Media features like lengths can be prepended with a prefix. And I've used the example in my previous slides with min-something or max-something. And you can use that for most, in fact, all the media features here that use a number as argument. Obviously, you cannot use that for orientation that uses two identifiers as a parameter. Orientation is portrait and landscape. That is trivial to understand. The aspect ratio, for instance, 16:9. You can define the aspect ratio or select the aspect ratio of your device. That's kind of cool. Same as width and height. You can select based on the aspect ratio of the device or of the viewport. Color and color index, this is based on the color map of your display. If you want to know if you have more than one color, 15 colors, 16 colors, a million colors if you want, you can select on that to show, for instance, a nice degradation of a full color scale image into a black and white thing, if you need it. If this is really useful, if you target e-book readers, for instance, with e-ink displays in black and white. You may want then to show a better image in shades of gray instead of relying on a transformation from color to shades of gray. Your choice. You can target monochrome displays, although they are rarer and rarer today. These media features can accept an integer, or just nothing. So monochrome, it's a Boolean value, we agree. Okay, a display is monochrome or it is not monochrome. And you can write monochrome colon 1 or just monochrome. It's a shorthand for monochrome colon 1. Resolution, the resolution is measured in dpi or dp centimeter, dpcm. I don't recommend you rely entirely on the resolution of the display to select a given device. For instance, the resolution of, this official resolution of the iPad Retina, for instance, because in the long run, you will have other devices with exactly the same DPI, and you will not be able to make the discrimination between an iPad Retina and another display by Samsung, for instance. And scan and grid, are, I'm not even sure they are implemented by anyone at this time. I mentioned them because they are listed in the spec, but it's probably pointless to discuss them right now. So the API part. The API part is probably little known, and it's still very useful. In particular, the least little known, the last one. So from JavaScript, you can check if a given media query is verified or not. Okay? You take the window object and you call match media with the query string. So if I write window dot match media of screen and between parentheses max width 500 pixels, and I apply it on that device, it will reply false. But it does not reply false directly. In fact, it replies an object called a media query lists. And matches is really the Boolean you're looking for. That one will tell you if the query is verified or not. So it's really convenient to decide if you want to do stuff based on the device characteristics from code. You have a reserialization of your query according to the serialization rules of media queries that are specified into the document. It's the media attribute. And more interestingly, you have listeners. It means that you can specify, you can set callbacks that will be called every time the query changes a value, okay, in the code. Let's say you want to have some code executed each time the user resizes his browser below or above the 500 pixels fence. You set up a listener. It's easy. It's just like an event listener in the DOM. And you get a callback. It's exactly the same. So this is little known. I recommend you take a look at the spec. This is not in the media query spec. I think it is in the CSS view spec, and you will have the link to it in my last slide. So what's missing? We already started thinking about CSS Media Queries 4. It's one of the 61 documents we have on the radar in the CSS Working Group. For 30 people, that's a lot. That's probably too much. But we missed a lot of things. So Opera implemented a media feature about paginated browsing. If you are, for instance, in an ebook reader, you're using a browser internally, okay? Everything is rendered by a browser. It's an HTML document or multiple HTML documents zipped into a single ebook. But you need to you need a paginated experience. You need to move from page to page. You move from page like that, or you have arrows to move from one page to the other one. You must be able to select that. You must be able to apply different style sheets if you have pages. You may want to apply different style sheets if you're in the dark or in full light. Because in full light, with some screens, you see nothing. You want to change the contrast. We have an API, a JavaScript API, in the Web APIs working group of the consortium. We don't have the equivalent in CSS right now. We may have to work on that in the future. JavaScript availability. This is a big thing. This is not based on the device. This is based on the browser's capacities. We have a lot of discussion about that. It was submitted to the working group roughly a year and a half ago. We still haven't decided. It's pretty complex. I mean, some people like Bert think, and he is right to think, that you should be able to browse the web without JavaScript activated. I mean, we have so many problems with cookies, with trackers, with malicious code inserted in some web pages. If you really want to disable JavaScript, you should be able to do that. But on some other hand, the modern services that you all use, and I do use on the web, require JavaScript. I know it's a pity, but that's life, and it's not going to change anytime soon. We should be also able to select based on human language. So Bert gave a talk about selectors. In the selectors, you can select based on the language of an element or language of the document, or if there's no language specified, even the HTTP language tag. But to do that, you have to use a colon-lang parenthesis selector or use a language attribute selector in all your style rules. In the future, we may want to have a media query targeting English or German, and you need to put all your rules for German in the same place. So it's a question only of maintenance and readability. It's not a question of possibilities. It's just an enhancement of CSS to make it more usable. We have much more than that on the radar. So when you have a CSS rule, when you are browsing the object model, that dirty thing that we unfortunately standardized 15 years ago and that is completely messed up, it's the dirtiest thing we are working with on a daily basis. It's ugly. But when you have an object in your JavaScript memory that is a CSS rule, you may want to know if it's applied right now or not. Or if you have a given query string, will it be applied or not? We don't have such an API right now. So this is the first one. What is the query needed to apply the given rule? And to do that, you have to browse all the ancestors to find the media rules or the link element or the style element, aggregate in some way the media queries and find the relevant one. The second API is, oh, I have this media query in a string. Will it enable my rule? And if you are writing an editor like me, this is tremendously useful. I know some people in the room are writing applications using content editable and editors and stuff like that. This is the kind of things you may want to use at some point in the future. And the last one is media list. We don't have a parse representation of the media query. When you have a media query like screen and orientation landscape and min width is and max height is, if you want to deal with it, if you want to tweak it programmatically, you have to reparse it. It's not parsed. You have no internal representation of it. You may want to reach only the orientation in it and tweak it. Okay? If you have to parse using regex all the time, that kind of beast, and reserialize it, it means that our architecture is missing something. I think this is it. We should have access to all the components of a media query. What's the next step? So Tab introduced it in his talk, extensibility of CSS. As I said before, a media query is a condition. It's a Boolean. It's a true or false. And there's nothing easier than writing a JavaScript function that returns true or false. So in theory, you should be able to say, I have a function that is based on some characteristics or the device, the browser, whatever, even of my document, returns a Boolean, and I want to use that as a media query. It should be doable. So this is the kind of things that Tab and I are going to pursue in the future. And I already started offering a new new proposal for extensibility of CSS. So this is one of the things I want to do. There are much more. Tab mentioned a few ones. Pseudo classes in the selectors. They are also a condition, a Boolean. We should be able to map user-defined pseudo classes to a CSS function. Possibly combinators, your own combinators. If you want to do something extremely complicated, for instance, I want to select these elements if they are the child and grandchild of that and sister and blah, 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 stuff like that. And you use one ASCII character or an identifier and you say, this is a new combinator. You declare it to the CSS parser and suddenly it becomes usable. So the way to do that would be through the new CSS Global Object. Let's declare a new media feature called foobar. That's the so common one. And I map it to an object that's called a JavaScript object, CSS MF foobar. So CSS media feature foobar. Okay? And I will come back later to the second one. So that's the trivial thing. As soon as you've done it, the CSS parser knows about it, and you can use it in your parser. So the first question that is raised when you do that is, okay, but you're loading JavaScript and CSS. What happens if the CSS is loaded before, uses foobar, and then the declaration of foobar in JavaScript comes afterwards? Not a problem. I mean, the CSS parser and the CSS engine should preserve the media query. It's invalid, it's not triggered. And when the JavaScript engine knows about it, the query is then evaluated again, and you run it. So it's not really an issue. It's probably not the way the browser vendors implement media queries right now, but it's a light change. And in terms of memory footprint or performance footprint, not a problem. And in JavaScript, you would have a declaration. So don't look really at the syntax. It's only, I mean, I'm thinking out loud. It's the kind of things you could have. Okay? You have a getter to have the value. For instance, if it's the width of the viewport, you just look at the viewport of your browser and you reply the width. Okay? You have a resolver. The resolver is a function taking a few arguments. First one is the feature, foobar, just to make sure you know it. If you use one single object for multiple features, you may want to know which feature you're querying. The prefix, if it's relevant, min dash or max dash. And the value, I want to compare the current value to 500 pixels. You do your stuff, and you reply a true or false. You have resolved the media query. And you have listeners. Of course you have listeners, because when the value changes, you want to notify the media query engine to do something. Re-resolve the rules, for instance. And that's where the update is needed. This is the kind of things your listeners should call when they detect a change in the value. And then you have plugged something entirely new into not only the CSS parser, but also the CSS engine. So I'm not saying this is the right solution. And it's probably pretty ugly, in fact. But it's just to show it is doable. If we can do it ugly, we can probably do it pretty too. We just need 10 years. This is the kind of things we will do. We will propose for media queries, pseudo classes, combinators, possibly pseudo elements even, because we could be selecting ranges in the document using DOM range to create pseudo elements like first line or first letter. We could do that. Maintenance of media queries. So Tab mentioned getting lost, being lost when you see 41.6667%. But personally, when I see that media query, screen and orientation landscape and resolution 264 dpi, I never remember that it's the resolution of the iPad Retina. Okay? You may want, in the future, to name that query. I want to call it iPad Retina Landscape and use only that name. I think we should do that. I'm not saying this is the right syntax, but this is a potential one. And it will help. Oh, sorry, I wrote var tablet. Var tablet is a mistake. It's var iPad Retina Lab. The future media types. So you notice that we are writing things like screen and width, 500 pixels. Why do we need screen anyway? Screen is a characteristics of the device. It should be a media query itself. Okay? So in the long run, we are a few members of the CSS Working Group thinking that we are going to get rid of the media types. I mean, half of them failed anyway. And move to media queries only that we aggregate with and. And it will be probably much better. And it will allow to get rid of the legacy browsers using only media types. That's probably a good thing. I'm not sure it will happen next year or even the next one, but it's on the radar. And that's it. You have two links to the important specs. First one, CSS3 media queries. The second one, CSS object model view. And before we move to questions, I'm going to show you what could be editing of WYSIWYG media queries. So there are two products right now able to edit media queries in a WYSIWYG editor. The first one is Adobe Edge Reflow, but it's not available as a final version yet. It's in beta, I think. You can download it still. And the second one is my own tool called Blue Griffin. So this is a very simple document. You have an H1, and I just set a font on it. Okay? So let me place the caret into the H1 and select a color. Yeah, I don't know, green. Just give an ID, okay? And I'm gonna specify a media query. The max width I want is 260 pixels. Oh, let's move the viewport to that. And select another color, orange. Done. So, you have the first rule here. Background green. Add media, screen, and max width, 260 pixels. And you have the same rule with another color. And if I move the viewport, done. Trivial. So this kind of things is going to change the way you work, because as you know, the main motto right now when you design responsive stuff is to go from narrow screens to wide screens, okay? But you still have to do a lot of design. If you can do that in the same window, just changing the size of the viewport, and all the rules you create are applied for that size, it's going to help you, I think. Of course, I did that with background color. You can do that with everything. The width, the position, even the display property. And that is the future, I think. So Edgeflow and Blue Griffin are the two first tools to do that. I can bet that all WYSIWYG editors are going to do it in the future. And that's it. Open to questions. How much time do we have for questions? Plenty of time. Cool. Go ahead. I mean, don't limit yourself to media queries. If you have questions on the consortium, the CSS Working Group, whatever.
Hi. Is it done? Yeah. My question relates to print output.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's going to be some provision in the form of pseudo selectors or that actually hook into the pagination algorithm. Because there's two use cases for that. One is invoices in print, but also when viewed in like an e-reader. Because then you need repeating header rows and subtotals. That's one. So you need to know on which row a page break falls, and then, for example, unhide are already pre-calculated subtotal. That's one use case. And another one is transpromo images. For example, for printed letters, if you have an advertisement on the bottom of a letter, if the page break falls on it, it should just simply hide. There's two use cases of such applications.
So we have this is not related to media queries really. This is style sheet specific to the print media. But we have another spec in the working group called CSS-free paged media. And a few proposals for the next level in CSS4 that address your concerns. The way we break into an element, the way we break between columns, the way we have widows and orphans, the way you copy the content or the text of an element into headers and footers. All of that is addressed by CSS-free page media. And another spec that is GCPM, so it's generated content for page media. And internally in the consortium and in the CSS Working Group, we call it garbage collecting placeholder module. Because it's a content sink, basically. It's pretty ugly at the time. But let's say 40% of it is quite nice and stable, and you have everything you need in it.
Okay.
So I suggest you take a look at it. Yeah, there's someone in the back. I can't see you, but you see.
Hello. Two things that affect in development nowadays. One is speed of the connection for assets. Another one is the input types that can be so touch versus a stylus or a normal mouse. Is it something that could be handled with media queries
Yes.
at some point? For example, if I can recognize that there is a touch device, could have a media query for that. And also if you could interface somehow with future connection speed API and say we can serve background images at a lower resolution, things like this.
The answer is yes. It was suggested to the working group in WordStyle and the mailing list roughly a year and a half ago again. It's extremely complicated to solve. Let's say you have an iPad, okay? On an iPad, you want to apply a very specific style sheet because you want bigger buttons. You don't have very thin fingers. But you can also use a, how do you call that? A stylet. Stylus. A stylus, sorry. Thank you, Tab. Thank you, Tab. You can also use a stylus. So the device does not know if you're using a finger or a stylus. How can you tell the browser? How can you resolve the media query? It is really, really complicated. Maybe at some point you need the user to say, I'm using a stylus somewhere in the preferences. And then we need to have hooks to the device preferences to be able to query that. It's not related to the device. It's related to the usage of the device that you're making. But the answer is yes. It's something that we do consider.
I have a question of...
Wait for the microphone, please.
Hi, I have a question about performance, I guess, on parsing media queries.
On what?
Parsing media queries.
Parsing, yes.
Say I have an old system with lots of code and I cannot refactor the whole thing. What are performance implications with common sense involved between writing 100 selectors inside one media queries and writing 100 media queries, 100 times the same media queries with 100 selectors?
So basically you are asking me, if I have some code, should I write one test with a lot of statements inside or 100 tests? Yeah. What would you do seriously in code?
I have to write it from scratch.
No, in code you would write one test.
Yes.
So what should it be different in CSS?
I'm asking it the order of magnitude of the performance implication of it.
Okay. The performance of CSS rendering engines and resolution engines, it was probably multiplied by 5 in the last 5 years. So it's not a problem anymore, really. 5 years ago, things I had to do in C++ code, I can now do them in JavaScript. So since the CSS engine of the browser engines is written in C++ or Objective-C or whatever, native code, it's not a problem. You will see a light degradation of performance and network issues if you write 100 media queries instead of one when you need only one. But I think it will affect only some web apps and stuff like that. Most users will not see the difference. You will lose, okay, probably 200 milliseconds. Right. But it's not a question of performance, it is a question of design. Is it maintainable, is it usable, whatever. Next. Have a question? You're all tired, need a coffee, and Tab Atkins killed the room. I don't want to follow you ever again.
I do have one. What about nested media queries? Because
I'm sorry?
Nested media queries.
Huh.
Not
a problem.
Don't see it in the spec yet, so.
I mean, you want to be able to say at screen and inside at print?
No, not necessarily, but
no, I'm kidding.
For instance, you can say at screen and inside at screen test for multiple.
Why not?
It's the conditional spec defined.
Yeah, why not? I mean, we plan to allow nested at rules everywhere, or almost everywhere. So, not a problem. It's something. The only issue with nested at rules is from an object model point of view. Right now, an at rule contains a list of rules, but style rules only, or a set of declarations, for instance, a property value, property value. If we allow at rules, where do we put them? It's a change in the object model, but it's something we can fix. It's not just a matter of time. These guys do run a lot. Note to self, next time find a flat room.
Could you comment on any pitfalls with the various length units, specifically centimeters and millimeters in combination with device and the normal width and height parts of media queries?
Pitfalls? I think there are only two. A CSS pixel is not really a pixel, but I think you all know that. The second one is about percentages. As I said, you have circular dependencies when you make a media query in percentage relying on the width of the viewport that is itself a percentage of the screen or stuff like that. Other than that, I mean, it's not like we are designing a rover on Mars or a rocket supposed to take off from Cape Canaveral and it explodes because someone used inches instead of centimeters. Your web browser is not going to boom. No, I don't think there's any problem. Europeans tend to use centimeters, not inches, but most of us use EMs, pixels, and percentages anyway. I don't see any pitfall.
Some browsers lie in their response to the media queries, like the Windows phone doesn't respond with the proper resolution. How could we fix that problem? Is there some drive?
Kill Microsoft? No, I'm sorry. You can't. You just can't. Unless you have a hack allowing you to select the Windows phone, you just can't. It's a problem we've always faced in CSS, HTML, or all the other web standards. Targeting a given device and all the ugly stuff it implements is almost impossible. It's impossible. At some point, you have to make a choice. I mean, if you want Microsoft to react, you have to provide Microsoft users with a worse experience than others. It is sad, but it is true. Because otherwise, they have no incentive to fix their resolution thing. So, but besides that, no, we have no way to detect it. Absolutely no way. Not only they lie on the device characteristics, but they also lie on the user agent. And PPK can, I mean, you know about that. I mean, everyone says compatible with Gecko and stuff like that. Okay. They all pretend to be someone else. So even if you look at the agent string, you cannot rely on it. It's impossible. I have no solution for that, I'm sorry. Other question? No last question? So you were the last question? Thank you.